Welcome to Semiconductor News Decoded. I'm Ty, with 31 years inside the semiconductor industry, bringing you the real view from the factory floor. Today's topic: South Korea's Yongin city is pushing to become a global AI semiconductor powerhouse, branding itself as Yongin Silicon Valley. Let's break down what this really means and whether it has a real shot at living up to that name. As always, I'll explain everything in the most simplified way possible. Even a middle schooler should be able to follow along. If you're a specialist watching, some parts might feel oversimplified, but I'd like to prioritize giving everyone the big picture first. Think of it like a local city mayor declaring they'll build the most famous shopping district in the entire country. So sit back and enjoy. Here's the analogy for today. Imagine a mid-sized city where the mayor stands up and announces, "We're going to build the most famous shopping district in the country." The city already has 2 massive department stores, already up and running. And the mayor says, "We don't just want department stores. Let's bring in small specialty shops and startup cafes too, and make this whole district buzzing with energy." Now, imagine that city suddenly has access to a fund worth $10 billion. Sounds great, but the real question is, what do you actually spend it on? Do you build impressive office towers and offer cheap rent to attract tenants? Or do you subsidize the cost of a small shop's very first inventory order? That distinction, subtle as it sounds, is what separates a district that truly thrives from one that just looks good on a brochure. For a brand new small shop, the hardest moment isn't the monthly rent. It's coming up with the cash to stock shelves before even one customer walks in. Dropping the rent slightly doesn't help much if you can't afford your opening inventory in the first place. That's why a district with a help cover your first shipment system will attract far more real businesses than one that simply lowers the barrier of monthly overhead. There's no doubt that architecture is a deeply human art. It shapes the one we live, everything from the cities we inhabit to the smaller spaces within them. It's the intersection of form and function, like both seeing and feeling something. So this news is really 2 stories in one. The first, a significant amount of funding is now on the table. The second, and more important question, will that money actually reach the places where it's needed most? With that framing in mind, let's move from the analogy into what's actually happening in the semiconductor industry. Let me summarize the city shopping district stance. Success here hinges not on the size of the fund, but on the precision of where it goes. And with that in mind, let's look at the real story. South Korea's Yongin city is genuinely unusual. It's home to both SK hynix, the world leader in DRAM and HBM, and Samsung, which spans both memory and foundry manufacturing. Re-elected Mayor Lee Sung-il is now capitalizing on this rare concentration of industrial muscle to pitch Yongin to the world as Yongin Silicon Valley. And honestly, my current position on this semiconductor hub initiative is almost exactly the same as this city shopping district story. At the heart of Mayor Lee's vision is something called the Silicon Yongin Fund, a proposed fund targeting approximately 1 trillion Korean won, which translates to roughly $1 billion US. For a city-level government to commit to a fund of this scale is virtually unprecedented in South Korea, and it signals that Yongin is genuinely serious about this ambition. What makes Yongin's approach distinctive is that it's not just trying to concentrate manufacturing, it's actively trying to cultivate upstream activity, chip design startups, and R&D. And the element I personally find most significant is the stated support for EDA tools and IP licensing. EDA, electronic design automation, refers to the software tool chains that engineers use to design semiconductor circuits. This space is dominated by American companies like Synopsys and Cadence, who collectively hold enormous pricing power over the global market. Let me be direct with you here, drawing from my own experience on the floor. One of the very first walls that a semiconductor startup hits is the cost of EDA licenses and IP licensing. It's not unusual for design tool subscriptions alone to run anywhere from hundreds of thousands to several $million per year. That price tag effectively acts as a gatekeeper, keeping many promising teams from ever getting started. On top of that, there's the weight of tape-out costs.
Tape-out is the process of taking a completed circuit design and physically printing it onto a silicon wafer to produce a prototype. At advanced process nodes, a single tape-out run can cost anywhere from several $100,000 to tens of millions of dollars. Almost no startup can absorb that independently. It's a cost that can make or break an entire company before a product ever ships.
Looking at this through that lens, the most impactful use of the Silicon Yongin Fund, in my view, would not be subsidizing office rent. It would be funding prototype runs at Samsung Foundry and co-purchasing or subsidizing EDA tool licenses. With that kind of support in place, a startup can actually get from idea to tested silicon, and that's the gap that kills most companies before they ever get traction.
Samsung Foundry is the contract manufacturing arm of Samsung Electronics, and it holds the position of the world's second-largest foundry after TSMC. That said, for the most advanced nodes, the majority of leading-edge customers still choose TSMC. The performance gap between the two remains significant. In Yongin, specifically, construction is underway on a national industrial complex for Samsung's advanced system semiconductors, with the first fab scheduled to come online around 2030. If and when that happens, the ability for startups to run prototypes just down the road could become a genuinely powerful geographic advantage.
Then there's SK hynix, currently the world's largest provider of HBM, or high bandwidth memory, which is the high-performance memory that powers AI accelerators. SK hynix's primary operations are in Icheon and Cheongju, but the company is now building a massive new cluster in Yongin, with the first fab expected to begin partial operations in 2027. As demand for AI silicon continues to surge, having the world's dominant HBM supplier anchoring a new campus in Yongin gives the Silicon Valley branding real, tangible weight.
That said, I want to be honest about a fundamental gap that still separates Yongin from the original Silicon Valley. What makes Silicon Valley the world's most powerful technology ecosystem isn't simply the presence of Google or NVIDIA. It's the cultural foundation that took decades to form. Stanford and UC Berkeley feeding talent into the ecosystem, a dense network of venture capital firms, and an entrepreneurial community that developed its own norms, trust relationships, and tolerance for failure over generations.
Yongin is getting the manufacturing infrastructure in place, and the capital is coming. But the harder question is whether there's a reason for engineers and researchers to stay when the cycle turns down. Top talent flows toward opportunity everywhere during a boom. What separates a real ecosystem from a temporary industrial cluster is whether people choose to stay, or even return, when semiconductor demand contracts and times get difficult. My read is that we won't have a clear picture of this initiative's success for at least a decade. The question is whether Yongin becomes just another concentration of fabs, or whether it evolves into something genuinely organic, where startups, established giants, and researchers develop real working relationships over time. And I believe the outcome hinges entirely on how the Silicon Yongin Fund is spent, and the philosophy guiding that deployment.
Let me bring together everything we've covered. Yongin City sits at an unusual intersection. It hosts world-class anchor tenants in both SK hynix and Samsung, and the city government is now proposing a 1 trillion won fund, roughly $1 billion, to build an AI semiconductor ecosystem around that base. The stated ambition extends beyond manufacturing into the upstream layers: chip design, EDA tooling, software, and startup formation. From a practitioner standpoint, the startups that will struggle most are those facing EDA license costs and tape-out fees, and targeted support in those two areas would have far more real-world impact than subsidized office space. The construction of advanced fab capacity by Samsung and SK hynix in Yongin creates a genuine geographic advantage for prototype access, but only if the surrounding support infrastructure is built to match.
Here's the bottom line. The Yongin initiative is not really a question of whether the money exists. It clearly does. It's a question of who the money serves and what it actually purchases. If the fund goes toward visible real estate and marketing, Yongin will look impressive on a map, but remain far from Silicon Valley. If it goes toward the unglamorous, time-consuming work, prototype subsidies, EDA co-licensing, deep research partnerships with universities, then 10 years from now, we may be looking at something genuinely different. That's the choice being made right now, even if most people aren't watching it closely.
That's all for today. I'll keep bringing you semiconductor news and analysis. So if you found this useful, please like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. This has been Ty on Semiconductor News Decoded.